Good morning, everyone. Do you know anyone who's stubborn? I mean, the sort of person who's difficult, who just doesn't listen to what other people tell them. The sort of person who just won't listen to advice. That sort of person who insists on doing it his own way. Well, today's story is about someone who was very stubborn. He had been told what God wanted him to do, but he just refused to do it. And in so doing, he caused a lot of trouble, not just for himself, but for everyone who was around him.
Pharaoh and the plagues. Moses had been given a job he didn't want to do. All he had to do was go to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say, "Let my people, the Israelites, go." The king was not amused. He said, "No." He said, "You think you have it hard now? That's nothing. You're going to work harder. Get back to work, you lazy bunch." Moses warned the king, "God is going to make things hard for you." But the king refused to listen. Moses went to the river Nile. He hit it with his stick and it started to change. It became red and thick and gloopy and stinky. It was like blood. The fish died and the people couldn't drink the water. But the king said, "No." Then God sent the frogs. They were everywhere. In the garden, in the house, in the beds, in the soup. At first, it looked like the king would change his mind if God took away the frogs. But when the frogs died, the king said, "No." After the frogs came the gnats. Whiny, stingy, itchy gnats. In their houses, in their hair, up their noses. But the king said no. Flies came next. Big, fat, buzzy flies. One fly is a pest, but there were billions of them. They were everywhere, except where the Israelites lived. The king said no. Could it get any worse? Well, yes, if you were an Egyptian farmer. Their animals became sick and died. Strangely, the Israelites' animals were not affected. The king said no. Then the people got sick. Big, fat, red, pussy boils covered their skin. Painful and disgusting. The king said no. After that, God told Moses to warn the king. "I'm sending a terrible hailstorm. Get everyone inside for safety." The hail was mega. It destroyed everything that was not covered up. Plants, animals, even people. The king said no. The locusts came from the east. They covered the ground. They ate anything green that had been left by the hail. Crops, grass, leaves, everything. The king said no. What would they see next? Well, actually, they couldn't see anything. It was totally dark for 3 days. But here's the weird bit. It wasn't dark where the Israelites lived. You can probably guess what the king said. No. Where is all this going? Will the king ever change his mind? Will the Israelites ever get out of Egypt? Wait for next week's episode.
Well, Pharaoh was very stubborn, wasn't he? Would you say?
He was, but I suppose Moses had to be pretty determined as well. I mean, he had to somehow keep believing that God was going to keep his promise and take his people out of Egypt, even though there wasn't much sign of it. He delivered God's message, he told Pharaoh, and instead of things getting better, things just kept getting worse. All he could do really was trust God and believe that somehow God would keep his promise.
I suppose he did. Well, just how did God keep his promise? We shall have to find out next week.
Now then, one of the plagues that God sent was frogs.
Boing, boing.
And just for a bit of fun, our craft this week is to make an origami frog. Or two. Or even a whole plague. Have fun.
Let's see how it's done.